Emma Keeley, member for Lowan, great to be talking with you again on Flow.
Always great.
And when we tracked what was happening yesterday with the Victorian Ombudsman, sort of out of the blue it seemed, made this announcement they were going to conduct an investigation into what they believe are systemic issues with the handling of exemptions for border permits. What was your response to that, first of all?
Well, I think most of us who live in regional Victoria or regional South Australia or regional New South Wales all know how hard it's been for a lot of people to cross the border and go about their daily lives. And people are pretty frustrated, I think, and shocked that for Victorians who are looking to come home that they've just been abandoned. And people have been left on the other side of the river and simply blocked from coming back to their own homes, even if they're in an area which hasn't had coronavirus. They've been isolating there for some cases up to a month or longer, and they're still not allowed home. There just hasn't been enough done by the Victorian government to get these people home, these strandees. And so the Victorian Ombudsman has rightfully launched an investigation to understand the impacts of the Victorian government leaving these people stranded over the border, but also looking at putting recommendations in place to improve the system.
Yeah, the Ombudsman, Deborah Glass, has said they're going to have a swift investigation so things can be moved quickly. One of those terrible examples she gave there was school children whose school finished up in New South Wales because it was locked down and they couldn't get home. It's reminiscent of that 3-year-old boy who couldn't get back to Queensland.
Yeah, it is. There's some really tough stories, and unfortunately kids seem to be bearing the brunt of most of the impacts of restrictions and lockdowns and border closures. We know now that some students in New South Wales are able to catch the bus over the border to go to school in Victoria. However, because their exemption is so limited, they're not actually permitted to go to school. They're still within that 2-week quarantine period as soon as they enter Victoria. So it's just like unpicking a really difficult framework that's been put in place where it's really put the health and well-being, particularly of our kids, but all normal residents who are just trying to do the right thing, who've got no opportunity at all of transmitting coronavirus, who in many cases are fully vaccinated, and yet they're still treated like prisoners and not able to do what they need to do, go to work, go to school, earn a living, and to just stay connected in their normal communities, even go shopping or go to the bank. It simply can't be done at the moment.
Now, before talking about the South Australia-Victoria border, the Andrews government has locked down Ballarat, which your leader Peter Walsh has said is unfortunate for the people of Ballarat, but at least it now represents a regional-based lockdown approach, like a council-based rather than a whole of regional Victoria lockdown.
Well, that's right. It's something that the Nationals have called for a long time, for the Andrews Labor government to see regional Victoria as just one single entity. I've always said, look, if there be a heap of cases in whatever area, lock it down, clear it out quickly, but make sure as many communities as possible in regional Victoria can keep on doing what they do best, which is just supporting one another to keep the businesses open, keep the schools open, and that will help to not just preserve people's mental health and well-being, but to make sure that they're not unfairly discriminated against and unable to go about running their business, getting an education, getting a medical appointment. We need to keep things as normal as possible for as many people as possible, and localised lockdowns will do that. So it's great the Andrews Labor government have finally followed the advice of the Nationals. They've finally followed our lead, and it looks like localised lockdowns will be more of a picture in Victoria in the future.
Now, the Victorian Ombudsman, Deborah Glass, she had about 80 matters or more that had come to her concerned about getting border exemptions. About how many cases are there that you're aware of when it comes to getting across to the South Australian side of the border?
Well, about a week or so ago, we thought it was around 4,500 people who were waiting for an exemption to enter into South Australia. And this isn't only people from interstate who want to travel back through South Australia or perhaps move home to South Australia. A lot of these people are South Australians trying to get home. We heard a case yesterday where someone in Broken Hill, they'd been camping in New South Wales, they're from South Australia, they'd had an injury while they were away and they weren't allowed back into South Australia and to get back home. We've had about 250 people that we've supported with urgent cases to get into South Australia. And most recently there's been a problem with people being stuck at the border, what they're calling strandees, of people who aren't able to get a health exemption. There's a backlog of, as I said, about 7,000 applications. And in some cases, people are sleeping in their cars with their kids, with their pets. Some of the kids I know are on NDIS, so they've got a disability and need support, and they have just been left absolutely high and dry with no support, no housing, and they've simply got nowhere to live. It's a really horrifying situation. It's just inhumane, and no state, whether it's Victoria or South Australia, should be treating our own citizens in that way. So I'm urging the South Australian Ombudsman to follow the Victorian Ombudsman's lead and to look at the process and make sure we're treating people with respect and taking into consideration the risk that they actually pose of transmitting coronavirus.
Yeah, I'm aware that today in the State Parliament in South Australia, they are conducting hearings into the border arrangements. So there may be further developments on this story off the back of what you've called for just there about the SA Ombudsman needing to get involved. So it's not usual or common that we see an MP from one side of the border making a call that what needs to happen on the other, but it just shows that how dire the situation is, that we need action from different sides of the border.
Well, I think we just need to work together, that we're all Australian. We need to treat coronavirus not with fear and to realise we're going to have to live with this into the future. More and more people are fully vaccinated. I think that in the most part people are trying to do the right thing and we need to make sure that people aren't left high and dry, that they're not left sleeping in their cars for 5 weeks, that they actually can get home and to be, to understand we can treat people in a way that we can isolate at home for 14 days, or we can do some rapid testing. There are so many other mechanisms rather than just locking people out and locking them into their homes or in their cars that would help just to treat people with respect. That's all I'm calling for, and I hope that the hearings go well with the South Australian Government, but please listen to people and make sure you're treating people with the respect that they deserve and don't just write them off because they don't happen to be in Adelaide today. That's not how we should be treating anybody in Australia.
Well, Emma Keeley, member for Lowan in Western Victoria, thanks for speaking with us to the Flow Network today.
No worries. Thanks so much, Ricky.